Well, this week so far, I've been really kind of laying into young men and their responsibilities, and particularly that responsibility not only to behave themselves and be self-controlled, but also to set an example by the way they live their life. That you don't have to be old to set an example. You can do that as a young man. And I think that it comes from what we talked about, particularly I talked about yesterday and the day before about living with integrity, that you're a young man who keeps your word. And I think this applies as well to young ladies. And also, secondly, that there's a seriousness in your speech, that you're somebody who is living your life, or not your speech, but you're living your life in a very serious way, that you're not just simply going through life trying to find what enjoyment and pleasures and entertainments you can experience, which in and of themselves are not bad, but if that becomes the focal point of your life, rather than living for Christ and being a disciple of Christ, you're really heading in the wrong direction, and you're going to find yourself struggling. And that's why the next thing that he comes to is he says, and having soundness of speech that cannot be condemned, so that those who oppose you may be ashamed because they have nothing bad to say about us. Soundness of speech. You know, it's interesting because the word soundness there really, as it's used in the original, implies healthy speech. Life-giving speech, things that add to the health of the people that you're talking to. And I think it's one of those kind of things that there are a lot of things that are trivialities that we can talk about. I mean, we talk about the weather, we can talk about, football or baseball or some kind of athletic thing that we're entertained by and we enjoy. But there's something about having speaking to people in a way that enhances their life and rather than just distracts their life. We live in a world that provides us with endless distractions, and from everything from drugs and alcohol to computers and video games and all those kind of stuff. And again, I just want to say, I'm not saying essentially that video games are bad or being on the computer is bad. What I'm saying is those things can become all-consuming. Part of the problem of smartphones and even the internet is that they're constantly sending you notifications to get you to take your eyes off of what you're doing and focus on it. I don't know if it would be a surprise to you, but when I'm working on stuff, I really actually turn my phone off and I don't receive emails or anything. And, I figure that if it's serious enough, they'll get a hold of me. But the simple fact is that it's so distracting. And you end up not being able to focus on what's most important. And this is critical to me. When I talk about the times that I spend in the morning with the Lord, my wife and I have this kind of agreement between us that we leave each other completely alone because, unless it's an emergency, because we need to really spend time focusing on what the Word says and not allowing ourselves to be distracted. And that's why I don't even read my emails before I've had time to read the Bible. I don't start even working on sermon preparations or preparing for things like this until I've first had time just to have quiet time with me and God. And so the first thing I try to do is every day is an hour or two, just reading the Word. And then my wife and I spend quite a bit of time in prayer, because I think that our hearts being rightly connected with God and focused upon Him is really, really important, because what you are thinking about will come out of your mouth. If there's frivolity and silliness going on in your head, if there's just a pursuit of pleasures, or even the pursuit of things that are wrong and unhealthy, then you're going to find profane things coming out of your mouth. And so it's important that you not entertain yourself with things that are unwholesome, but you focus upon those things that are true and good and right. Things that cannot be condemned, that nobody can come alongside and saying, you shouldn't be saying that, you shouldn't be reading that, you shouldn't be doing that. Now, when I talk about even something like reading, I'm very eclectic in my reading. I read a lot of different things. I will admit I'm not big on fiction, because I'm really more interested in reading things that actually happened. Have a little room for some fiction, and I got to admit, Tom Clancy books really captured me, but they were based so much upon true military dynamics that I found that to be very enlightening. I guess the bottom line is when I read, I want to read something that's going to add to me, has added value, not something that's just going to take me somewhere where there's no benefit or value at all. And so it's this idea, though, that what you put in is what's going to come out. Out of the abundance of the heart, Jesus said, the mouth speaks. If my heart is being overtaken by resentments and bitterness, hatred, envy, jealousy, pride, lust, that's going to come out of my mouth one way or another. It's going to be something that we express. And so the fact that once we express it, it's out there sometimes for the whole world to see and we can't take it back is kind of a frightening prospect. And ultimately, if that happens enough, it becomes a thing that defines you. And that's why if you say something that's unwholesome, you need to stop and say, I need to ask you to forgive me for that. I'm sorry. And don't make that statement that's so untrue. I don't know where that came from. Well, let me tell you where it came from. It came from your heart. And you just need to do some deep dives into your prayer time and say, God, what is it that's going on in my heart? As David said in Psalm 139, in verses, I believe, verse 24, where he says, search me, O God, and know my heart, and see if there's any wicked way in me. Because it comes from something inside of you. So out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so if you don't want to have speech that can be condemned, reproved, corrected, then you need to do a deep dive and ask, where is that coming from? And because ultimately there's something greater than just your feeling or your reputation, although your reputation matters. Now, don't fall into the trap of trying to protect your reputation, because if you do that, the enemy will make an effort to besmirch your reputation and you'll end up wasting a bunch of time trying to defend yourself. Let God vindicate you. Let God defend you. Don't waste your time running around trying to defend your reputation against negative things that people can say about you, because you will find that'll happen anyway, no matter what you do. But at the same time, you have to know what you know to be true. And that's really where you're able to put your head in the pillow at the end of the day. You know what's true. And when something that comes out of your mouth is unsound, if you catch it early, it won't have a chance to grow up and ruminate. Because I've talked with people who are just spitting out so much resentment and anger and frustration and hostility. And in some senses, justifiably so. Somebody has done something to them that shouldn't have been done that way or shouldn't have been done at all. And I get it. It makes sense. But you have a choice. Do you want to become that person? That's why the writer of Hebrews put it very simply in chapter 4. He said, there's a root of bitterness. Chapter 2. He said, you develop this root of bitterness that defiles your entire being. So when you see bitterness, and it's all of its forms of resentments and angers and sense of malice. Malice means you're thinking about how you're going to get even and put them in their place. On and on it goes. That you're walking down this dangerous path that you're going to get overtaken by someone. It's the kind of thing that God said to Cain when he got overtaken with bitterness and resentment towards his brother Abel. And the Lord came to him and said, it's like a lion crouching at the door, that if you don't deal with it, it's going to consume you. And he didn't deal with it and it consumed him. He ended up murdering his brother because he wasn't able to confess and address his bitterness. So important. So when you find things coming out of your mouth that aren't right, that are unkind, unloving, you find yourself gossiping and maligning and so forth, to sway other people in particular to be on your side of the fence, you need to say, forgive me for that. I need to deal with that. And really seek the Lord to be freed from it, that you can not think bitter, vengeful thoughts, but you can think God's thoughts. Ultimately, God settles the score. He says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. So he tells you and me, you don't have a right to take vengeance because your hands are never completely pure. Only God can deal with the injustices of this life. Let God deal with it in terms of your own personal life. Now, if you're in a position where you can execute judgment, you have a right to say what's right and wrong, then you need to always make sure that you're standing with those who have been wronged against those who are wronging them. But at the same time, keep in mind that when it comes to be personal attacks against you, the best thing to do is just ignore it. And you don't need to necessarily try to go out and defend yourself, because it just tends to make it worse and tends to validate what the critical people are saying about you. So don't go there. Instead, just simply say, okay. And if people want to pick up that stuff and follow it, they'll discover soon enough that they've been deceived and led astray. But don't you be one who contributes to that. I put it this way years ago when I had somebody who was well, there was a situation and they were really besmirching me to other ministries, sending letters out about telling what a terrible person I was. And I remember I was praying and talking to the Lord about it, and something just popped into my mind all of a sudden. It was, you can't have a tug of war if you refuse to pick up the other end of the rope. And so I never responded. I just ignored it. I let the person go on. And eventually people got tired of listening to him, and it showed up, and his ministry just dwindled away to almost nothing, if not nothing. And it became a non-issue all on its own. I never had to concern myself with it because I realized this is going to be a bigger problem for them than it is for me. So soundness of speech, so that those who oppose you become ashamed because they really have no basis to continue on. But don't keep the fire burning. Don't keep on throwing logs on the fire. Don't, if you pull the fish out and you keep on splashing it water, it will keep on flopping. Just let it flop until it's dead, and then you can move on. Don't have the smell of dead fish on you because you're filled with bitterness and resentment. Okay, I quit. I won't do any more. God bless you.